The scene was chaotic. A woman in ragged clothes and disheveled hair stood at the entrance of a posh restaurant, her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself. But the staff and customers weren't listening. They called her a liar, accusing her of trying to scam her way into a meal she didn't deserve. Without a second thought, they dragged her out, ignoring her desperate pleas. The harsh words echoed in the background as the doors slammed shut behind her, and the world seemed to forget her name, her story, her truth. But what no one knew was that this woman wasn't who they thought she was, and her life was about to take an unimaginable turn. Just as she was about to disappear into the crowd, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the restaurant. A tall figure stepped out, and the moment his face became visible, everything changed. He wasn't just any man, he was her husband. And not just any husband, he was a billionaire. As he strode into the restaurant, all eyes turned. But this time, the whispers weren't filled with judgment. They were full of shock and disbelief. Who was this woman? And why had they made such a terrible mistake? The questions hung in the air, and the tension grew thicker by the second. The woman, once humiliated and tossed aside, was about to reveal a truth that would leave everyone speechless. But what happens next? Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't believe. The restaurant fell silent as the billionaire entered, his tailored suit and polished shoes gleaming under the chandelier's soft light. He moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the room for his wife. People shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands, trying to piece together the strange turn of events. No one had seen him coming, and no one had any idea who he really was. As he reached the front door, the staff froze. The manager, who had been so quick to dismiss the woman just moments ago, now stood awkwardly in front of him. His face turned pale as the man's eyes locked onto his. There was an undeniable tension in the air, the kind that made everyone in the room feel like they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't understand. But it wasn't just the staff who were confused. The woman still sitting outside the restaurant hadn't expected her husband to come. She'd had spent the last few years in hiding, away from the lavish world he had known. They had both agreed to keep their lives separate, mostly because of the chaos that his wealth seemed to bring. She had grown accustomed to the life of anonymity, even if it meant being misunderstood by the world. But now here he was, walking straight into the place where she had been humiliated. It was clear something had gone wrong. But what exactly? Why had she been dragged out in the first place? And why did her husband show up so suddenly, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along? Her heart raced, and she stood up to face him, knowing that everything was about to change. But before she could step forward, a voice behind her called out, "You better explain yourself. All this will get ugly." The crowd was closing in, and the tension was suffocating. What would happen next? Only time would tell. As the tension in the restaurant grew, the woman stood frozen, her breath shallow as she turned to face the crowd. The whispers swirled around her like a storm, but it wasn't the murmurs of judgment that scared her. It was the uncertainty of what would happen next. She had spent years keeping her identity hidden, always staying in the shadows, away from the world that would never understand. Yet here she was, pulled from the dark, exposed to the very people she had tried to avoid. Her husband's arrival had been both a blessing and a curse. He was her lifeline, the one person who knew the truth. But as he stood there, looking every bit the part of a powerful, untouchable billionaire, she couldn't help but wonder if his sudden appearance would only make things worse. Could they fix this? Or would her past, the very reason she had been forced into hiding, tear them both apart? The manager, still shaking, nervously glanced at the woman. "Sir, we had no idea she was," he began, but was quickly interrupted. "She's my wife." The billionaire's voice was cold, but it carried authority that silenced the room. "And I expect you to treat her with respect." His gaze shifted toward the woman, softening just a fraction, but that brief moment of warmth didn't last long. As if on cue, a voice from the back of the restaurant shouted, "You're just a gold digger, aren't you? No one's buying this act." The woman winced, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She had been called worse in her life, but hearing those accusations now, in front of so many, make her feel small. The truth of her past seemed to hang over her like a shadow, threatening to destroy everything she and her husband had built. Was it possible to ever outrun her history? The billionaire didn't flinch at the comment, but the unease in his eyes betrayed his calm exterior. He turned to face the woman, his jaw tight. "We need to talk," he murmured, as if this moment would be the tipping point. The restaurant's once chattering patrons fell silent, waiting for the next chapter of this unraveling story. Would the truth finally come out, or was this just the beginning of an even darker twist? The silence in the restaurant felt suffocating. The woman's heart raced as she tried to steady her breath, knowing that all eyes were now on her. Her husband stood a few feet away, his presence a solid anchor, but even his towering confidence couldn't erase the sense of dread building inside her. Every minute felt like an eternity, and the pressure of the moment was unbearable. She glanced at the crowd. Most was still whispering, their gazes filled with skepticism, curiosity, and judgment. She could feel their eyes on her, wondering what she had done to deserve such a dramatic entrance. But in the midst of all the uncertainty, one thing was clear: her past was catching up to her, and this time there was no hiding. The billionaire's calm facade was slipping. She could see it in the way his hands clenched at his sides and the coldness in his eyes when people dared to speak out against her. Despite his wealth and power, the woman realized with a jolt that even he couldn't control how others saw them. And for all the strength he had, there was one thing he couldn't protect her from: the truth. "Just tell them already," a voice rang out from the back of the room. The woman's blood ran cold. It was a familiar voice, one she had hoped never to hear again. Her mind raced. How could they know? How had they found her? She knew that voice, and it terrified her. The past she had buried so deep had resurfaced in the worst possible way. She was no longer just a woman caught in a misunderstanding. This was bigger. Her husband's expression darkened. His steps toward her were slow, deliberate, as if he knew this moment would change everything. "We don't have much time," he whispered, but she could barely hear him over the pounding of her heart. The room seemed to close in around them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the sense of impending chaos became impossible to ignore. What would happen when the truth finally came out? Would it destroy them both? The tension was unbearable, and yet it was only the beginning. As the tension in the room reached its peak, the door to the restaurant suddenly swung open. The soft chime of the bell seemed to echo through the silence, and every head turned in unison. The woman's breath caught in her throat when she saw who had entered. It wasn't just anyone. It was someone from her past, someone she thought she had left behind for good. The man walked in with the same confident stride that once made her feel both drawn to and terrified of him. His eyes locked with hers, and in that brief moment, a cold shiver ran down her spine. He was the last person she ever wanted to see again, and yet there he was, standing in the doorway like he owned the place. He had a smirk on his face, as if he knew something no one else did. Her heart pounded harder as the realization hit her. He wasn't just an old acquaintance. He was a part of the secret she had been hiding, and now he had come to claim his piece of the story. The billionaire beside her stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the man. A brief flicker of recognition passed between them, but neither of them spoke. The woman felt the ground beneath her feet shift. She had spent so long running from this very moment, trying to protect the life she had built with her husband, but it seemed that fate had other plans. "Looks like your little secret's about to be exposed," the man called out, his voice dripping with malicious delight. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more curious. The stakes were rising, and the woman could feel the weight of her past closing in on her. The lies, the deception, it was all unraveling. What was he here to say? What did he know that could destroy everything? Her husband moved protectively toward her, but even he seemed unsure of what was coming next. The room was on edge, and the truth was no longer just a whisper in the shadows. It was coming for them all. The man who had entered the restaurant took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the woman as if he had all the answers. But before he could say anything more, the billionaire's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Enough," he said, his tone unwavering. He turned to the woman, his eyes full of questions. "Is he the reason you've been hiding?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. For the first time, she could feel the weight of her secret pressing on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her response. This was the moment. She could either let the truth destroy everything or finally let it out, no matter the cost. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's the reason I ran. He's the one who made me disappear." The man behind her smirked, but there was no victory in his expression. "He's lying," her husband spoke again, his voice surprisingly calm. "And you're part of the past I promised her we'd leave behind. This man," he pointed to the intruder. "He's been blackmailing her. She's been running from him for years, trying to escape a life that nearly destroyed her." The man laughed, a hollow sound that made the woman shiver. "Oh, come on. You think I'm the villain here? She's the one who betrayed me, took everything and ran. You really think she deserves all that wealth? You don't know her like I do." The billionaire stepped forward, his expression hardening. "No, you're wrong. She deserves to be free, and I'll make sure you never threaten her again." With a swift motion, he signaled to security, and in an instant, the man was escorted out, leaving behind a stunned silence. But just as the room seemed to settle, the woman felt her heart stop. The billionaire turned to her, his face unreadable. "There's something you don't know. The real reason I found you today," he said, his voice low. Her stomach churned as she waited for the final truth to unfold, unsure if she was ready for what he was about to reveal. The woman's heart raced as the billionaire took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. The tension in the room was thick, and everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. "The reason I found you today," he continued, his voice soft yet firm, "was because I've been looking for you for a long time. The truth is, I never thought you would leave, but I knew the moment you did, something was wrong." She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I didn't just marry you for your love. I married you because I knew you were hiding from something, from someone. I've known about your past, and I've been protecting you from it without you knowing. That man who walked in, he's not the real danger. The real threat has always been someone closer than you think." Her mind spun as she tried to piece together his words. "What are you saying?" The billionaire reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to her. "I've been working with the authorities for months. That man isn't just an old acquaintance. He's been manipulating everything, our lives, your fears, your past. And now we can finally end it." Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, revealing papers that connected dots she hadn't known existed. The truth about her past was darker than she could have imagined, but in this moment, something shifted inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. As the police arrived to take the man away, she looked up at her husband, a newfound sense of peace settling over her. "I didn't know how to trust anyone after everything," she whispered. "You don't have to anymore," he replied softly, his eyes filled with a quiet promise. "We'll face it all together." And as the restaurant, once filled with whispers and tension, finally quieted, she realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. One where her past no longer defined her, and where she could finally live the life she'd always dreamed of. The weight had lifted, and the future, full of possibilities, was finally within reach.